The Allen Line Company appreciates all of the dedicated carriers it takes to move loads across the U.S. Stay safe.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
The Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance has updated its out-of-service criteria, and the changes go into effect on April 1st. Kerri Wirachowsky, CVSA's Director of Inspection Programs, explains what changes were made and why. What is the fuel of the future in the trucking industry? For some time, the government has been pressing for battery-driven electric trucks. Others have already moved on to the use of hydrogen-based fuel cells. But the Southwest Research Institute is looking into another alternative, hydrogen combustion. I'll discuss the organization's research with Dr. Thomas E. Briggs and Ryan Williams. Also on today's program, when it comes to Washington, D.C., there's no question that money talks. But Lewie Pugh, Executive Vice President of OOIDA, argues that the people still have the power, but they have to harness it to make change come about. He'll tell us the best and easiest way to do that. But first, here's Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. There are some changes coming to the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance's out-of-service criteria you should know about. There are a total of 11 additions or changes that go into effect on Monday, April 1st. Kerri Wirachowsky, CVSA's Director of Inspection Programs, is going to help us run through some of the bigger changes you'll want to be aware of, starting with leaks in the tread area and automatic tire inflation systems.
This is a big change. So basically, as of today, because it's March at the moment, so as of today, if an inspector stops a vehicle, equipped or not, with automatic tire inflation systems, if they hear an audible leak, then that trailer or that truck is put out of service for whatever tire is leaking. As of April 1st, if they stop the same trailer and the trailer is not equipped with automatic tire inflation systems, nothing changes. But if it is equipped with automatic tire inflation system and they hear an audible air leak, they will inspect that tire. They will check the pressure in the tire. And if the ATIS system is keeping up the leak, and it is not gone down. And this is only applying in the tread area, by the way, not the sidewall. If you have a leak in the sidewall, you will still be placed out of service. But if it's like a nail in a tire on the tread area, then if the inspector checks the pressure in the tire and the ATIS is maintaining the pressure, then still a violation, still will receive that violation on their inspection report, but they will not be placed out of service for that tire. They will be allowed to continue until the end of the trip, fix that tire before next redispatch.
Our next change prompted by a few roadside inspections on a few different vehicles that turned up a similar problem, missing camshaft bushings in the brake. In the past and until April 1st, missing and worn camshaft bushings have not been cited as violations because they ultimately result in a different brake violation that's already documented.
But in this particular case, the bushing was completely gone and the camshaft had moved inside the spider casting to a manner where the S-cam, when it rotated, it was rotating up against the brake drum. So there was no push rod stroke measurement problem, but we didn't have a brake that was operating either, not like it should, because the S-cam wasn't rotating on the rollers anymore. So there was brake manufacturers in the room, and they said that's an ineffective brake. The missing camshaft bushing should now be part of the 20% criteria if that is the case. And a worn camshaft bushing will still not be. So that resulted in two different things. One, adding missing camshaft bushings into the 20% criteria. So in other words, that would be one defective brake, not necessarily out of service, unless you have more than 20% of all the brakes in the combination ineffective. But then it also resulted in us modifying the camshaft bushing bulletin to indicate that worn camshaft bushings are not a violation, but missing camshaft bushings are. So as of April 1, you'll see a new inspection bulletin posted to match and go with the out-of-service change that's in the 20% criteria.
Another change to CVSA's out-of-service criteria taking effect on April 1st relates to coupling devices. And Wirachowsky says this is an example of yet another change prompted by another real-life situation that occurred roadside.
So that one was in relation to a vehicle that was stopped at a scale again, and the actual drawbar for the pintle hook was not in the pintle hook. It was underneath the bumper and stuck underneath the truck. So it wasn't it wasn't connected at all. So when it came in, the inspector was like, I don't have anything to put him out of service for. So that was a simple change, actually, that when you're using a pintle hook, you need to be using it. So the out of service was just amended to say not in use when required. So basically you have a truck, you have a trailer with a pintle hook device, and the eye is not in the pintle hook. It's somehow connected to the truck some other way. So no, I have never seen that before, because normally the trailer won't even be there if it's not connected correctly. But this was a situation where that was the case. Then it morphed into a discussion about ball hitches. So they put this same information in for ball hitches, that it had to be used if it's required. And then it morphed into a slightly more further conversation about mismatched ball hitches. So you have a drawbar that says that it needs a 2 5/8 ball, and you're using a truck that has a 1 7/8 ball hitch on it. So they added the word mismatched in there. So if you have a mismatched ball with a ball hitch, then there's an out of service criteria for that.
And another change, this one related to night driving and lights.
So actually, this was an interesting one. So I'll give you an example. A truck is driving down the road. It's 11 o'clock at night, and the driver has not turned his lights on. So there's no tail lights, no ID lights, no lights at all. So the vehicle is stopped, and the question was asked, because it says they're required lights to be on, so headlights and tail lamps, and they're not on simply because the driver didn't turn them on. Should he be out of service or should he not be? After discussion, it was determined that no, he should not be placed out of service for that. The driver can absolutely be charged under state law for not turning his lights on. He's supposed to have his lights on at 11 o'clock at night. But when the inspector starts the inspection and has the driver turn his lights on with the key in the on position, if the headlights are working and the taillights are working, there are no equipment violations and there is no out of service condition. It is solely up to the inspector whether or not the inspector charges them under state law for not having them turned on at the time.
Just a few of the changes to CVSA's out-of-service criteria taking effect April 1st. Wirachowsky had one more on her radar, though.
The only other one was there was a note added to the bottom of the lighting section that if you have lights that are, say you need brake lights or turn signals and the maximum height is like 72 inches and the lens color is supposed to be red, and instead you have them at 80 inches and or the lens happens to be amber for whatever reason. Those are violations of the federal regulations, but there was a note added that we will not place the truck out of service for those violations. The light has to either be not there, obscured, or inoperative.
You can check out the other changes to the out-of-service criteria along with the complete handbook at cvsa.org. One more item of note, because the Alliance's International Road Check event will be here before long. It's scheduled for 3 days starting May 14th across Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Wirachowsky's advice, start making sure you're in compliance today.
The focus this year is tractor protection systems. That doesn't mean that they're going to just check tractor protection systems, but drivers should know how to check them. Inspectors should be checking them as well. So we just decided to target that aspect of the inspection procedure to better educate both the drivers and make sure that the inspectors are doing that portion of the test in the 37-step inspection procedure during a level 1.
Our thanks to Kerri Wirachowsky of CVSA for her time and for helping us understand all the new changes. For Lay in Line Now, I'm Scott Thompson. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. You can write a letter to your elected officials in Congress or look up contact information for lawmakers who represent you on the state and federal level by using the website fightingfortruckers.com. Again, that website is fightingfortruckers.com. Next, I'll discuss some research into hydrogen combustion engines with Dr. Thomas E. Briggs Jr. and Ryan Williams of the Southwest Research Institute, and we'll hear about the power of grassroots efforts on government from OOIDA Executive Vice President Lewie Pugh. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
Buckling up keeps everyone safe on the roads. Learn more at www.sharetheroadsafely.gov. Paid for by FMCSA.
What is the fuel of the future in the trucking industry? It sounds like a very theoretical discussion to have, but in fact, with the government pressing all the time for fewer and fewer emissions from large trucks, it's a discussion we need to have. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddick. Welcome back to the program. For some time, the government has been pressing for battery-driven electric trucks, and by now, many truckers will be familiar with the shortcomings of that technology. Others have already moved on to the use of hydrogen-based fuel cells to generate electricity, a new kind of new fuel hybrid. But the Southwest Research Institute, a scientific organization based in San Antonio, Texas, is looking into another alternative, and it's one that uses some existing technology in a new way to achieve a close-to-zero-emission truck, and that is hydrogen combustion. Among the people working on the project are Dr. Thomas E. Briggs, Jr., an Institute engineer, and Ryan Williams, manager of the Institute's Powertrain Engineering Division. I spoke with the two men recently to discuss their research, how it might translate from the lab onto the road, and some of the practical concerns that truckers might have. Well, first of all, I'm wondering if you would talk generally about hydrogen as an alternative to diesel fuel. What are the upsides and downsides, in a broad sense, to the use of hydrogen?
I think the main upside is really the carbon content. So we're looking to eliminate CO2 emissions and avoid the more catastrophic consequences of global warming. And so we need to find energy sources that are carbon-free to do that. And hydrogen is a carbon-free fuel. And so that is the main upside of moving to hydrogen, that we eliminate the CO2 emissions part of things. As far as the downside, I think the real struggle, and then maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, is the energy density of hydrogen can't keep up with liquid fuels in general. It's liquid fuels are kind of the gold standard in terms of energy per weight unit, and so that's where maybe there will be some challenges in just making sure that you can get the range and the mileage that you need to out of hydrogen. But in terms of some of the alternatives, the low carbon alternatives, hydrogen is a pretty attractive source. It's got a very high energy per mass density or energy per mass rating, but it's really the mass per volume that is the problem.
We've heard about the possible use of hydrogen, and this is something that there's been a lot of talk about in trucking in terms of using it to power fuel cells, to power an electric motor in a large truck. But you're talking here about hydrogen combustion directly powering the drivetrain. Why would combustion be superior, say, to using it to power fuel cells? What are the relative advantages and disadvantages there?
So I would say that we're still in a development stage to where we don't know what the final right answer would be if there is one. If we look at a fuel cell today, all the manufacturers are working on developing. There's billions of dollars of investment across the heavy-duty trucking industry to develop fuel cell powertrain. On the plus side, it's zero emission at the truck. You make water, but you don't burn anything, so you don't make nitrous oxide emissions. You don't have any of the pollutants, which is a big concern when you go into really landlocked areas like Port of Long Beach, things like that. The downside is today they're pretty expensive because they use a lot of expensive materials. They're not made at scale. there's a lot of pretty complicated manufacturing processes that just don't have this century of development that we have with the IC engine. So they've got some good, but they've got some challenges today. Those are mostly engineering challenges. We probably can address those over the years, but it takes time. If we look at putting that into an IC engine, we're looking at existing technologies. So the benefit is we've already got manufacturing capacity. We know how to make these things. We're going to make them effectively, reliably. The engines last for 1 million miles easily. Service, you can go to any, garage and the mechanic is still going to know what to do. There's not that much change on the engine. And so for the operator, have a problem? No problem. Any place is going to be able to work on this just like they would on a diesel truck. There's not that much difference. But we do have nitrous oxide emissions. What we're seeing with our work here is they're going to be really, really low, cleaner than a diesel truck. So you're still way better than you are with anything on the road today. You're probably still going to be better with anything that's going to be on the road coming after 2027 with the new NOx regulations, at least no worse. And so it's not zero, but it's really, really close to zero. The other thing that's really going to matter at the operator end, whether it's a fleet or an individual owner operator, is what's the cost per mile. We don't know that one today. If you look at a fuel cell, somebody's pitching a fuel cell, they're going to point out that the peak efficiency of a fuel cell typically looks a little higher than the peak efficiency of the engine. If you dig in deeper, it's usually at a relatively low power compared to the maximum rated power of the fuel cell. And so for a heavy duty application where you're running at 50, 75% load, the engine may actually be more efficient. But over time, those are going to kind of leapfrog each other as technology develops on both sides. So we don't know where total cost of ownership, cost per mile, whatever metric you want to use will end up. That's where we see, and we're working on both at our facility, we need to push both forward to figure out, is one winner or the other, or is it going to be different markets, different sectors would pick one or the other for other reasons?
Okay. In reading some of the material on this, it appeared to me that what Southwest Research Institute is doing is retrofitting a traditional diesel truck to run on this hydrogen. And that seems to be, if I'm understanding what y'all are saying correctly, and you've kind of referred to this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the specific modifications that have to be made to a traditional diesel engine in order to use hydrogen as a fuel, because I know that other fuels have been tried, for example, liquefied natural gas that requires an entirely different structure in that engine. What's got to be done to use hydrogen?
Yeah, so there are actually a couple of different pathways. So you talk about the liquefied natural gas, and people are probably familiar with the HPDI technology, and that has been applied to hydrogen as well and is perfectly applicable. So there are maybe fewer changes to the base diesel engine to do something like that. We have in our approach here, we actually started with a natural gas engine, so the natural gas version of the X15, just because it had a few more of the necessary components. The main things that you really need is you need a new injector to get the hydrogen to the engine, and in our case, we're doing a spark ignited combustion, so you have to add a spark plug. Which is why we started with the natural gas engine, because it had the spark plug there already. And then apart from that, it's smaller changes. The engine block and the cylinder head are generally fairly similar to the diesel. You may have to change out your turbocharger because you need more air going through the engine to burn hydrogen. And then on the vehicle side, it's really just the fuel supply and some of the additional sensors and systems that we've put on for safety as well.
Ryan, I wanted to ask you about one thing, something you mentioned earlier. You're talking here that you're modifying as I understand it, a liquefied natural gas engine, correct?
Not quite. So if you're thinking of liquefied natural gas as the high pressure direct injection, this is more similar to like CNG trucks, if you've seen those. So anything that runs gaseous natural gas, it's similar to that technology. So the engine inherently looks a lot more like a gasoline engine. So you're adding fuel, you're igniting it with a spark, and it burns. Whereas with the HPDI and some of those liquefied technologies, you're still burning the fuel like a diesel engine with a compression ignition. So that's the primary difference with our engine here.
Yeah, so I was going to say, if we step back and kind of look across the whole industry, so we're doing this specific project for a specific reason. So we picked, natural gas engine because it's the minimum number of things we have to change on the engine, which for our purposes was an advantage. If we'll look at what's under development across the industry, I can't give specifics or names, obviously. There's a bunch of different approaches that each OEM basically says, what do I have and what makes sense for my business planning. And so, we talked about the HPDI injector technology that Westport offers, and it's gone into a variety of different engines for different OEMs over the years, typically using liquefied natural gas as the fuel. Some companies are working with that because, as Ryan said, you can basically just take off the LPG tank, put on hydrogen tanks, and same thing basically works. You still have some diesel fuel because you're using that for the ignition, so you still have some CO2 emissions. And so, again, when you get into regulatory issues and things, we're still not totally locked down on that, but it's an easy way to do things if you're already working with that injector system on other trucks in some market. Other OEMs are basically, okay, what if I pull out my injector, put a spark plug in there? I'll do port injection, kind of like an older gasoline engine, or maybe figure out how to put a direct injector in, more like a gasoline direct injector. Doesn't look exactly the same if you look at the part, but conceptually the same idea. For some of the OEMs working in the medium duty space, they're looking at, I'm going to do a new cylinder head that looks more like what you would build for a gasoline engine. They've got bigger volumes. They can do that there, and that gives them some performance advantages. But you've got to sell a pretty large volume of engines to do that. So when you get to the 13 to 15 liter class, you don't sell that many engines economically. That's kind of a tough thing. So you can do very little to modify the engine, or you can do a lot to modify the engine. And there's reasons that you may choose to do one or the other if you're going to go into production with it. It really depends on how many do you think you're going to sell, how does that fit into your manufacturing plan and other stuff. But in the end, there's relatively straightforward ways to do this, no matter what OEM you're talking about, what kind of truck you're going into. The biggest change you're going to see at the truck level is this big old hydrogen tank system that goes onto it in place of the diesel tanks. The rest of it basically looks like any other engine, just a few components have been changed out.
Something I wanted to ask both of you here, kind of broadly before we get into some other topics. Why did the Southwest Research Institute decide to pursue this particular area of research? With everything going on, the big thrust right now on the part of the government is toward electrified trucks. So why did you decide to pursue this avenue of research?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And really, the way we see it is that it's going to take a whole array of technologies to fully decarbonize transportation. There is no one technology that is the silver bullet that's going to be perfect for every application. And so when we see legislators and regulatory bodies talking about banning any one specific technology, that's where we get concerned. And so that's really why we launched this program, just to show both to the industry and to the public that hydrogen engines are also a viable pathway to decarbonization.
I've been talking with engineer Dr. Thomas E. Briggs Jr. and Ryan Williams, manager of Powertrain Engineering Division of the Southwest Research Institute, a scientific organization based in San Antonio, Texas. And the topic is the Institute's research into hydrogen combustion to fuel large trucks. We'll be back after the break with more of our conversation. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a cat scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget misaccuracy when you check on a cat scale.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now. Welcome back. Before the break, I was talking with Dr. Thomas E. Briggs Jr. and Ryan Williams of the Southwest Research Institute about their research into the use of hydrogen combustion to power large trucks. We continue now with that conversation with an exploration of some of the practical aspects of hydrogen-fueled trucks.
They may not be the perfect technology for every application, but particularly for long-haul trucking, it seems to be a really good fit. Especially where it gets very difficult to get enough batteries on a vehicle to get the range that you need. And so that was really our main motivation, was just to say, let's not rule engines out yet, and let's work on this technology. And as we talked to a lot of our customers who are major OEMs and suppliers, they were kind of the same mind that we need some more development and some more research in this area before we start to pick the winners and the losers in the technology race.
I'd like to ask you both about some of the concerns that truckers on the ground have, especially the one-truck operations, which is a lot of our audience. And one of the big concerns that these truckers have with electric trucks is range. Right now, a diesel-powered truck might go 1,200 to 1,800 miles on a typical fill-up. Do you have any idea yet of what kind of range a hydrogen combustion truck might have?
We've been looking at that, and that's one of the reasons that we and the OEMs we work with like hydrogen. We don't do a lot of work with fleets, but we talk to fleet operators, and they run into the issue with electric trucks that they're getting way less range than they need on a charge. Then you get into, where am I going to charge it? Or enough charging stations? A whole bunch of stuff you have to deal with. Again, with time, can that be fixed? Yeah, probably, but it's a challenge today. Hydrogen, probably realistically, from your audience would be, it's going to be in between. You can think of it, roughly 1 kilogram of hydrogen is kind of like a gallon of diesel fuel. If you look at, okay, how much space would I have behind the cab on like the Class 8 semi with the sleeper cab option? Might have to go to a slightly longer frame, but I can put enough hydrogen capacity on there that I think you could say I could get 800 miles of range, out of a tank system that doesn't look insane. And again, we're not putting anything down on the frame rails where the saddle tanks would have gone. Could you do it? Yeah, you have to worry about, you got to have some armoring on there because now you've got hydrogen, which is a little bit different than diesel fuel. If you've got a side impact, can be solved, and some truck OEMs in Europe would look to doing that because of the way their trucks are laid out, since they're typically box trucks. That's the only place you got. Again, maybe you get to like 1,000 miles of range if you really pushed and put tanks everywhere. With gaseous hydrogen, that's probably where you start to say, okay, now it's just getting ridiculous in how much I put on there. So if you've got, saddle tanks on both sides with the extended tank options, a liquid fuel truck is always going to win on total range between fill-ups. It doesn't look too tough from what we're looking at in terms of packaging onto the truck to at least give enough range that you can drive as far as you can in your legally mandated hours before you have to fill up. I lived in the Midwest, and so I know a lot of truckers like to cross certain states that have really high fuel taxes. And so again, you'd have to plan your stops carefully for that, probably, compared to having a little more flexibility. But you can get a reasonable range that you're not having to stop and fill up halfway through your hours or something. You're going to be stopping because you need to for other reasons.
I want to talk about something that you mentioned in there. You said something about armoring and saddle tanks and so on. We all grew up with the film of the Hindenburg going up in flames, and people kind of famously regard hydrogen as explosive. Have you done a lot of looking into, I mean, you mentioned the armoring, but what kind of safety features would be needed on a truck to prevent that kind of incident out on the road?
So kind of the nice thing about hydrogen is we started looking, or the industry started looking at this back in the early 2000s. You may remember there were a few hydrogen cars that BMW had put out. And so that was really when the industry started to look at safety for hydrogen. And since then, the safety standards and the regulations have really matured quite a bit. So there's a lot out there. It's not like it's completely new ground for us. And so in terms of, the tank structure and, safety of the tanks themselves, we're fairly confident there. Like Tom said, there's maybe some concerns about impact and things like that. But one of the nice things about hydrogen is that it dissipates. If you do end up with a leak, it does dissipate pretty quickly. So it's not like a liquid fuel where maybe it leaks and pools up on the ground and poses a risk there. So if you do have a leak, as long as you don't ignite it right away, it seems to, the hydrogen just tends to dissipate quickly. So the main concerns are just on structure and overall integrity of the tanks themselves, and that regulation is pretty mature.
There's some other things you have to do. Crankcase ventilation for diesel trucks has typically been pretty rudimentary compared to what we've had on passenger cars. As we go to the 2027 emissions regulations, that's getting more sophisticated anyway, just to keep the NOx emissions down, because you actually get quite a few emissions from the crankcase if it's just an open vent. For hydrogen engines, we go to active ventilation. Basically, you want to make sure you're pulling hydrogen out, that you don't build up hydrogen in the crankcase. Technology is already out there. The suppliers have parts. We're integrating it onto our truck. It's straightforward enough. The OEMs will all have that kind of stuff done. Intake manifold, you don't want to have a carburetor or something of that level where the whole intake manifold's full of hydrogen, because then you do have something that's potentially explosive if you have a backfire. Again, nobody's building engines like that. So the places that you really have a risk are in the engine itself. And that's just, we don't design the engine in a way to be dangerous. We make sure we design in the safety features there. There's some cool stuff on tanks. It's been a few years, but some companies have worked on tanks that the fiberglass wrap actually changes color if there's any, material stress. So you can visually see the tank is weakening. So there's a bunch of stuff like that the industry's already figured out, that we'll figure out what makes sense, what doesn't. Again, most of the tanks on these trucks are going to be up behind the cab, where they're pretty well protected from most collisions. And so, in as much as you can make anything really safe, it looks pretty safe from the typical kind of collisions you would see on the road. There's been some high profile stuff over the past 12 months where there've been some fires when hydrogen vehicles are being refueled inside a building. That's actually one of the more challenging things, is when we're doing work here in our labs, we have to do a lot of work on ventilation, because hydrogen, like Ryan said, is really light. It rises up to the ceiling. So down at floor level, there's no hydrogen, even if we had just opened up the tap and let the hydrogen flow under the room. It rises really, really quickly, but you can build up a lot of hydrogen in an enclosed space up at the ceiling level. So you have to make sure you're ventilated there. In a building, if you're doing maintenance, so shops are going to have to worry about that. The laboratories we work in, we have to worry about that. On vehicle, there's hydrogen sensors in the cab under hood to make sure that any place you could get a buildup, you detect it and you do something to prevent there from being a safety issue before you get to that point. So for the most part, it's stuff that we know how to deal with, and we're building in. It's fun to watch Hindenburg documentaries. Most of the fire was really just the fabric material was highly flammable. Hydrogen played a role initially, but then it all disappeared pretty quickly. And so, again, we need to do the same thing, that if you have a hydrogen leak, let it go up into the sky and it goes away. And so it's really watching for the enclosed spaces where hydrogen can build up and you actually run into a problem. And that's mostly part of the vehicle and the engine engineering that the people making these things are going to do.
I want to go to another practical concern that truckers have. When everybody was looking at liquefied natural gas a few years back, it's a cryogenic fuel, and that was going to require all kinds of specialized training or equipment in order to simply refuel a truck. And if you look at electric trucks, of course, you're talking about the length of time necessary to refuel, with the air quotes there. Right now, a trucker can basically refuel the rig themselves. Is there special training or care needed to handle the hydrogen refueling? Is this something someone can do themselves, or is this something where you really need to have someone else doing the fueling for you? Or have you gotten to that point yet?
We haven't dealt too much with the refueling from what we've seen, and there's a lot of work going on there, and mostly in standardizing the refueling process. The big concern is the high pressures that we're dealing with during refueling, and so it isn't as simple as just dropping the hose into the tank and letting it fill. But for the most part, there's a lot of automation and some smarts that, the vehicle is talking to the pump back and forth and monitoring pressures and fill rates and things like that to the point where that's pretty transparent to the driver. I think the end goal is that the driver can show up as long as he's had the training to hook up the hose properly to his vehicle and make sure everything is sealed tightly, then he should be able to just push the button and refuel, and most of that is taken care of by the smarts of the system itself.
The real world experience is in California, 3,000 some light duty hydrogen vehicles, mostly in the LA, San Francisco area right now, and 30 some refueling stations. Those are all self-serve. The hydrogen nozzle, it's basically a big fancy locking mechanism that positively locks onto there, and just the driver comes up, they hook it up. There's a lot of sophistication in the refueling system, and that's still under active development to make it more reliable and to handle the higher flow rate you need to fill up a heavy duty truck. So they're talking about, water cooled nozzles, because you're pushing so much flow through there that it's going to get hot. But again, that's all transparent to the driver. They just hook it up there, it's a twist lock or something like that. It electrically communicates and says, yep, everything's good. And it lets the pump start putting fuel in. So it should be able to be self-serve. You're not going to need safety equipment or anything like that. You'll just need to be accustomed to using a different kind of a fuel pump than you use today, based off the experience we've got right now.
Just one last question, gentlemen. What state of development would you say your technology's at? And kind of what I'm getting at is, how long might it be before we actually see something using this technology out on the road?
So there are actually limited production of hydrogen engines in Europe already. JCB is a construction equipment manufacturer in the UK. If their press releases indicate, and we've confirmed, they are limited production of hydrogen IC engines. They're going into prototypes and test things right now. It's not something you just go to your dealer and buy, but they're getting pretty close to where they can do that. There's some other companies in Europe that are kind of at that same stage where they're doing limited production today for certain applications. If we look here in the US, we do more than just the research stuff that we're talking about today. We're one of the biggest certification labs in the country for heavy duty trucks and engines. Looks like we're probably talking between 2027 and 2030 when we see most of them come to market, one of these. And so OEMs are kind of going right into that process over the next 12 months. Which puts them online that these things will be on the road around 2027 to 2030. Again, depends on the OEM and how aggressive they're going after this.
Again, I've been talking with Dr. Thomas E. Briggs Jr. and Ryan Williams of the Southwest Research Institute about their research into the use of hydrogen combustion to power large trucks. We'll be back in a moment. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Capital Reman, your leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Let us help you avoid costly downtime and repairs by visiting capitalreman.com today. Use code OOIDA10 to receive your member benefits.
Stock up on Howe's Diesel Treat, the nation's most trusted anti-gel. And to be safe from the harshest winter conditions, make sure you have Howe's Diesel Lifeline on hand, the fastest-acting gelling rescue product. Available nationwide, Howe's products are designed to keep you rolling through the toughest conditions. Visit howesproducts.com.
Attention professional drivers, are you behind on your tax filings? You owe money? Integrity Tax Relief Group frees drivers from IRS trouble. You watch the road, we'll keep an eye on the IRS. Call now. 855-976-4291.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. Time now to get up on our soapboxes for a moment and preach to you about the importance of annoying your members of Congress. We'll explain what I mean by that here in a moment with the help of Lewie Pugh, the Executive Vice President of OOIDA, who joins us in Studio A. Lewie, good to see you.
Hey, it's good to see you as well, my friend.
So we should explain what prompted this topic, and this is an opinion piece you actually wrote, I think, for the March issue of Landline magazine. And in it, you point out that while money certainly does talk in Washington, D.C., and we know that it really does talk, the people do still have the power out there. You're calling it grassroots power. What prompted you to write this?
Jamie Jones told me to.
And what she says goes.
Yeah, she made me do it.
All right. Well, there you go.
There you go.
It's going to be a short conversation, Louie.
No, seriously, though, because I think we talk about this a lot. And we talk about reaching out to members of Congress and how important it is to have a relationship with your political representatives, and we say a lot, but we probably don't say enough of why, I guess, maybe is, it's just like, hey, call your congressman, go to Fighting for Truckers, but why? And that's part of the reason. And also, I guess after the hearing that we saw there, I think it was in December,
Yep.
And Congressman Nels and Burleson and Collins and Bost and some of the other congressmen who understand trucking or at least listen to truckers and to OIDA and stuff, they really spoke up and they really got on FMCSA and the administrator, and they didn't really hold any punches. And the reason they did that, and they didn't hold those punches, was because the simple fact was, from one, our tireless efforts on the Hill, but mainly from the tireless efforts of our members picking up that telephone and calling them and letting them know how important these issues are. For anyone who watched that, and if you go to a lot of social pages and YouTube, you can find clips of that. But for anyone who watched that, there was one point where Nels, Representative Nels from Texas, good friend of truckers, held up a copy of Landline magazine. Now, I'm sure everybody listening to this knows who Landline magazine is.
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah. But when you look at that, you'll notice that magazine has tabs stuck to it, a whole bunch of tabs. That's from a member who sends him one every single month, goes through it, tabs at the things that he needs to read, and sends it to Nels. And apparently Nels reads it.
Yeah. And not saying you have to do that necessarily. You don't have to go through an arts and crafts project or anything like that. But I mean, we're talking phone calls. And, I know just from my experience, the idea of calling up your member of Congress or shooting off an email or what have you, people are busy. They got stuff going on. They're working hard. When they're not working hard, they're spending time with family, with friends, doing whatever they may want to do. I think the question you ask is why, because it does make a difference. I mean, it could be a short conversation over the phone. It could be fightingfortruckers.com, using that form there to reach out. But it's important to do it, and it doesn't take that long. What kind of feedback do you get from people when you ask members to do this? Do you get some pushback from them?
Yeah, the biggest thing I get, and I talk to members of truck shows and all the time here on The Office and all the time, and it's great. But the biggest pushback I always hear is, well, that's what you guys are for. I'm not good at talking to people. I don't know how to talk to a lawmaker. I don't know these bills. I don't understand. Blah, blah, blah. They love what we do, but they're like, I don't know. And I say, first I say you're the expert. You're always the expert. There's nobody on Capitol Hill other than very few, which is Congressman Boss, probably first, and Collins, who have a trucking background. There's a couple other have a little bit of trucking background, but really no trucking. And the rest of them only know what they're taught. I mean, it's just like me. I don't know about being a radio disc jockey like you. So you have to tell me how to do these kind of things that we're doing right now.
Yeah, sure.
Because I don't know, and that's the way it works. So, and I remind people that there's lots of people on Capitol Hill telling lawmakers things that aren't true about trucking or that aren't going to make trucking better for you and for others out there. So that's why you need to educate them, and nobody better to educate them, because all these people who are telling them that this won't work, they never drove a truck. They never sat behind a wheel.
They got their own interests in mind.
They got their own interests, their own agenda, their own money, and the last thing they are going to do is lobby for something that's going to help you. The thing is, never can they say about whatever they're lobbying for is, when I drove truck, I know if you'd have done this, it would have been so much better. They don't have that real world experience. And that's where truckers, that's where you do have. And that's what you say. You don't have to know the bill per se or know the right words. Just be professional, be yourself, and say, hey, I'm a trucker and I'm going down the road, and if you put a speed limiter on my truck, you're putting me in harm's way, because first and foremost, I can't get away from something if I need to, or I'm going to have all these people continue to cut me off, or they already don't like me, and whatever you have to say. Be yourself, be professional, and say it. And look at me. I go to Capitol Hill. I'm going there in a couple days. Going to be there for almost a week. Probably 20-some meetings on Capitol Hill. I'm talking to lawmakers. I'm still a trucker. I don't know how to talk fancy or professionally or any of that kind of stuff. I give real-world advice. I give real-world statements. I say, this is what my members are telling me, this is what our board is telling me, or this is what I've experienced. And that's it. And you know what I've found? Most lawmakers, they actually like that. They like that there's a person with real world experience telling them the truth. Our lobbyists here at OIDO are professional lobbyists. That's all they've ever. They'll tell you lawmakers like it because they get tired of hearing from lobbyists who are in there pushing their agenda. It's like NASCAR, they all got all these, they're all in their little sponsors trying to get their little thing. It's nice to have a real person come in there. I still remember meeting with a lawmaker, and I'm there with one of our lobbyists, me and we're talking, me and this lawmaker. We have a really nice talk. And before I get ready to leave, he gets up and he shakes my hand, and he shakes our lobbyist's hand, and he said, Mr. Pugh, I really appreciate you stopping by. He goes, please stop by more. He says, what we need is more real people in here. That's what we need. We need to hear from more real people. Now, I guess my lobbyist is kind of like Pinocchio, wasn't a real boy, but
he kind of snuck into the background and said, all right, I guess I'll see myself out.
But that's why.
Well, that's what I was going to say too, right? I mean, obviously, like I said earlier, money talks. The money obviously is going to get you access to, getting in the door to make your point, whatever it may be. But on the other hand, if there were thousands of truck drivers out there calling their lawmakers about speed limiters, for instance, just for one example there, they're going to get word that we're getting phone call after phone call or email after email about this one issue. That is going to make them take notice of that. Getting people around to do that, though, is a little bit harder, obviously. But I think the underlying point here is that it does make a difference. And as you said there, they want to hear from you because they don't know. There are so many bills out there that there's no way they could track all of them. But if you reach out and tell them, hey, this speed limiter thing is going to be a cluster, you know what, and this is why, that's going to hold some real weight there.
Yeah, because here's the deal. When you call you should always try to ask for who handles transportation in their office. You may get that person, you may not. But that's who you want to try to get a relationship with. But when you call, right, you're getting a staffer. You're not getting a lawmaker. Okay, and staffers get hundreds of calls a day.
Right.
If they get one call about an issue or two calls, it goes in this pile. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
If they start getting the same thing over and over and that pile starts growing, they go to their boss and say, hey, we better look into this, because if you want to keep your job, because votes count and votes matter, and if you want to keep your job, this is something that you better start looking at and thinking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, fightingfortruckers.com is a place to go for really a one-stop shop for doing all of this. And this year is going to be super important because of speed limiters. I think we're going to see a lot of action on that. And again, let your lawmakers know where you stand on this. Lewie, always a pleasure. Safe travels in D.C., and I'm sure we'll talk to you afterward.
Hey, thanks for having me, and be safe out there, truckers. Thanks for what you do.
Our thanks to Lewie Pugh of OOIDA for his time today, and our thanks to you for listening. And I might add, thanks for all you do to keep America moving. We'll see you next time right here on Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.